discussing the 5 most interesting books read in 2024. It's a short list of books that we read, the most interesting ones in terms of whether they inspired us, whether we learned something from them, or like in the case of East of Eden, just maybe coming back to a classic that we've read many times before, but maybe it was the right time to read it. So there's different reasons why we would choose books on this list, and it is the top 5. And for new listeners, why are we talking about books here? The purpose of this of the Not Even Run podcast is to give people a sense for what it feels like to run a hedge fund, and we've said that many times before. Reading is not just a pastime of a hedge fund manager, but also the actual work. It requires, in the knowledge business, you have to be able to think a little bit beyond the lines, beyond the corners, around the corner. You have to, for lack of a better description, maybe you have to find a way to do yoga for the mind. And this is one way, reading books. There's other ways, whether it's also physical exercise, actual yoga, conferences, interviews, courses, discussions, conversations. Reading books is one of them, an important one. Legendary investors like Warren Buffett have spoken about this, and I think reading is like literature is it's a way to learn, but it's also a way to train your thinking muscle, and this is very important in the hedge fund business. So the first book we want to talk about is actually an essay by Tom Wolfe. It's The Painted Word. This is a really, really interesting approach towards art, but I think in general also towards any other kind of societal activity, whether it's business, financial markets, and that is the theory is observation laden and observation is theory laden. What that means is that when what Tom is describing in his typically snidey, sharp, funny way is how the New York art scene in the 60s and 70s was really driven by critics and by the word. So it was the word which decided what we see. The critics made us look at a painting and told us what we see. And that literally happened. I mean, this is literally what modern art, in my opinion, and then postmodern art, and even today, a lot of the art scene actually looks like, which is you look at something, you're not even sure whether it's art or not, and then somebody tells you what it is, and then somebody buys it for millions of dollars, and then it turns out to be, oh, that's really good art, and something else which is maybe some sort of from an artistic perspective, maybe even better or whatever, it does not deserve the same accolades. So this is in general what the Painted Word says. It says a couple of other things that, in my opinion, are very important. For example, this is my interpretation that what happened in the 20th century and what culminated in the art scene sort of in the second part of the decade actually started in the first part of the decade, and it really started with physics and started with science and with people like Einstein and Heisenberg and Planck and the revolution in quantum mechanics, which basically told us that there are things that we really don't understand and we don't see, but we know they're there, and therefore we need a theory to understand what we're seeing. We can't just rely on experience. We can't just touch stuff. We can't just say, well, this is what I see, right? It has to be explained, and the same way, the uncertainty principle of Heisenberg, in my opinion, one of the most important philosophical achievements of the 20th century, just says, look, there's a limit to measurement. Because there's a limit to measurement, we have to find a way to bridge that. Because if we still want to believe in something like truth, if we want to believe in that we know what we're doing, all these kinds of things that we still do, I would say most people go around the world thinking that they're in charge of their own destiny in terms of they know what they're doing, they know what they want and things like that. But if you can't measure stuff, if you can't rely on your experiences, you need something, and that's theory. So this is a really broader way to think about decision making, to think about how we make decisions. And I think one of the things that it makes me also infer here is the connection to actually cryptography and the decision of like who's actually in charge of telling us what is and what isn't, right? whether it's the Fed telling us what money is, whether it's some sort of political establishment tells us what we should be doing and not should be doing, whether it's the art world deciding what is beauty, what isn't, or the fashion world, maybe less so in sports where we decide usually, it's decided in the ring, as they say, the winner wins. But in many other fields, we need an arbiter, and actually crypto is a new way to make decisions, right? It's a decentralized way. There's no throat to choke. Nobody can be influenced. Nobody can have extreme power. So this is, I think, very interesting also from that perspective. Now, in that realm, the second book is Girl in the Band by Kim Jordan. She was with Sonic Youth, not the front girl, but definitely interesting part of the group. Her ex-husband was the front man, and together they kind of were Sonic Youth. I think this is a book that I really like to read for two reasons. One, I was a big Sonic Youth fan, still I am, not listening to the music that much, but most importantly, it's a really nice description of the New York art scene of the 1970s to 1990s, and it inspired me actually to go back and listen to some of the music that came from there, more on the classical side, like Glass and Cage. But nevertheless, I think this is all related. Like you have, whether it's Richter's paintings, whether it's Cage's music, or Sonic Youth, or some of the other stuff that came out artistically. I think New York in the 70s and 80s was a hot pot of potential. And that's interesting. That's really interesting. Again, from a more general perspective, the question, okay, how does this even happen? Why was it New York? Why wasn't it something else? And there's other towns like Paris, early 20th century, maybe Berlin for a while, and then you have other maybe lesser so important cities, but maybe locally important. Barcelona certainly for a while was very prolific. So you have to ask yourself, how does this happen? And we want to now draw the arch to other areas. Silicon Valley is a hot pot of potential for wealth creation today, actually more than ever. And other areas, I'm sitting in Zurich right now, asking myself. Just had breakfast yesterday with a professor here at the Polytech, which is a top-notch university, and I asked him the question, like, how come you have this top-notch university and then you have basically nothing going on otherwise in terms of startups and stuff. Now he said, oh, well, Zurich is a hot pot of innovation. I felt like, yeah, Zurich's been the hot pot of innovation for the last 50 years, as far as I'm concerned. And nothing really, it's like Paris or London. Yeah, things are happening, but it's not even comparable to what's going on in Silicon Valley. So the question then comes, why is that, right? That's the real question to me. And this is not meant to haggle about who is more important or anything like that. I don't really care. I've lived in both places for a long time, so I have a good sense. I also lived in New York for a long time, although in a time when I would say New York's potential was declining. So I just witnessed the last 2 years of CBGBs, for example, where the Ramones and Blondie and these people came up and Talking Heads. So I saw some of it. I was a little bit involved in the house scene. And I was also obviously involved in the financial hedge fund scene. So I saw definitely potential, but it is more on the declining side. And I would say today New York is culturally not very interesting for various reasons. I think the main reason is just it's too expensive for people to go there and experiment. So back to the question of Gordon's book. So she does a really good job. I think literally, stylistically, she did a very good job. She is a true artist in the true sense that she touches things and they are just good. So that's one thing. She has a non-biastic way to show her life, which is great. That's from a biography perspective. From an autobiography perspective, she did a really good job in depicting her life without making you feel like you're some sort of voyeur looking into it. And I think I always come back to 0 to 1, the most important business book ever written, I believe, and it applies to not just business. It applies to, art. It applies to all kinds of areas. And I think, again, Sonic Youth, Girl in a Band is a nice book for people who are interested in understanding of how that works. Whether it's music or business doesn't matter. Some sort of authenticity, some sort of some sort of risk-taking ability that is just unique to people like that can create value or wealth from 0 to 1. The next book is quite a leap now, Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak. So this is a very, very different type of book. This is incredibly important. I read this book right before the US election, and I think the atmosphere in the country, in my opinion, was definitely like it's a make or break situation, because the US was definitely slitting into some sort of disaster, and it might still be there, but at least we have some hope now, because fundamentally what we were facing is some sort of revolution, some sort of trying to undermine the old values with new values, and therefore Zhivago really fits in, because that's exactly what happened in Russia in the early 20th century with Lenin and things like that. And what the book is describing in a beautiful way is just a story of people that go through the Russian Revolution, pre and during and post, and it just describes an area of power vacuum, but cultural vacuum and value vacuum. And when that happens, things tend to go really bad, and that's what happened in Russia, and that's why there was a fear that the same is happening in the US. When you start rewriting history, when you start totally diminishing any kind of value system that the society was built on, and you throw new stuff at it, and here's just some quotes from the book: we are children, we are not sons. So there's no providence, we don't come from anywhere, we're just children. Revolutions replace one set of limitations with another, which is of course what happened. Like, you want to free the people from oppression, which is what happened in the Bolshevik Revolution, but then they got imposed even worse restrictions, gulags and all that kind of stuff. What was conceived as ideal and lofty turned into material and coarse. Again, you start, like, this is reminiscent of today, whether it's Europe, whether it's the United States. You want to change things, you want to make life better for people, but then you just take one set of restrictions, and then you restrict other people with other types of restrictions. So this is kind of the fundamental, I would say this is the main theme of the book, throughout the book. That's what Pasternak in beautiful ways described. I mean, it's a wonder that he was able to actually live in the Soviet Union and even die in the Soviet Union of a natural death, while he was really kind of saying pretty bluntly how bad the Russian Revolution was. And I think that's a testament to his artistic value, that even the Bolsheviks, even the communists under Stalin and later let him live. This brings up one question. Every time we talk about revolutions in the history, at least in modern history, you have to ask yourself one fundamental question, which is, why did the US Revolution work? And all these other, pretty much any other revolution didn't work. French Revolution was a disaster. The Bolshevik Revolution was a disaster, but the US Revolution worked. And to be fair, the Glorious Revolution in the United Kingdom, maybe 100 years before that, worked also. So some revolutions work, some don't, and that's certainly a question that I can't answer here in a couple of minutes on the podcast. But what I'd like to say is, again, leaning on the book. This is not leaning on Dr. Zhivago, and again, I mean, this is not even an hour podcast. This is a PhD thesis. Why did the U.S. Revolution succeed and the Bolshevik didn't? Or what's wrong with, let's say, this so-called woke revolution versus the U.S. Revolution on the Washington and Hamilton and Jefferson and all the founding fathers? I think the fundamental difference is that the U.S. Revolution was built on a certain set of values, which then sort of had their organic manifestation in society, versus the Bolshevik Revolution for sure had to be imposed. So one Leviathan just was replaced with another one. And that's the problem, right? When you have to install into, let's say, in the case of Bolshevism, you have to force people to call themselves comrade, right? It wasn't natural, and and when you do these things, sooner or later, comrade's not enough, and you're not a comrade enough. You're not enough, and then you end up in the gulag. And French Revolution was the same. The sans-culottes were the sans-culottes, and at some point, being a sans-culotte was not enough, because if your grandfather was an aristocrat, you were guillotined, and there was no end to it. Same things are still happening in the U.S. with the woke mafia, or whatever you want to call them, where it's not good enough just to be transsexual anymore. You have to be whatever sexual. and nothing's good enough, and that's the problem with these types of movements. And as opposed to that, the U.S. Revolution was based on certain values that just manifest themselves. You didn't have to force people to strive for liberty, like that. It was just organic. It was natural. They wanted it. They came from everywhere. They still are coming, for that matter, for the same reasons actually, for liberty and freedom, which is a testament to the success of the U.S. Revolution. Certainly, there was also what helped this is the vast amounts of land available in the U.S. versus, let's say, Europe. So people came and had land and didn't have to fight each other over acres. But anyway, I guess to summarize Pasternak's book, it's a really, really fundamental book in many ways, because it shows not just what happened during the Russian Revolution, which in itself is very useful for scholars of that part of history, but in general, it has this overarching general value that I believe is very valuable for any kind of study of history. Now, the next one, I'm jumping around here, so I'm going back to contemporary. The next book is The Whole Story. It's an autobiography by John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods. This, in my, again, it's a book close to my heart, because as professionally, we were involved with Whole Foods for a long time. I would say it's the first stock that we actually made real money with. So it has this special place in my heart. But let's put aside that. I mean, this book is much more important than just making money with stocks. It's, I think, most importantly, what this book is another manifestation of 0 to 1. For anybody who's interested in wealth creation, you have to read this book the same way you have to read Sam Walton's book, Made in America, or those were the two main ones. What they describe is not necessarily how to, technologically make something work and make money with it or anything like that. It's more about the culture that it takes to go from 0 to 1. Whether it's the risk-taking ability, whether it's the unrelenting, whether it's the pursuit of excellence and the persistence that it takes. This is Thomas Edison. What did he say? Persistence, perseverance, something like that. I forgot the exact quote. So all of these things are here in this book, and it's really well done, because Mackey is he's a good storyteller. So it's like just a story about a hippie in Austin, Texas, who turns into a businessman and changes the way people eat in the United States. This is the story. There's a company attached to it called Whole Foods. There's about $20 billion attached to it too in terms of value. The company was sold to Amazon. Another, by the way, example of how important culture is, because the same company now under Amazon is not going anywhere just because the culture is not there anymore. So you have the real estate, you have the brand name, you have all these things, and they just are completely irrelevant if the actual thing which matters, which is the culture, which is driven by, usually it's one person, it's one mind. And the next book I'm going to discuss, East of Eden by Steinbeck, has that also in it, where all good things really always start with one person in one mind. They do then, of course, require collaboration, and that's also what happened in this story. I mean, Mackey talks a lot about how he worked with other people and how important that was for him to work with other people. But it always comes back to him. The buck stops with him, and that's what the entrepreneur does. That's what people like Bezos did, Gates did, Musk is doing now. Jensen is doing with NVIDIA, and many other people. I mean, I'm not doing justice to all the other entrepreneurs in the world, but those are sort of the most famous ones. And I think that the interesting thing about this book, in my opinion, is really how related these stories are. You could take Jeff Bezos. If he wrote the book, it would be very similar, because it always comes back to at least in the wealth creation part. What happens afterwards, once the wealth is created and the company is large, and then things become bureaucratic, and all these things change. But the creation, when you go from 0 to 1, when, like in this case, you have a grocery store in the corner of a nondescript Austin street, you go to a global, not global, but nationwide, massive retailer that really changed the way people eat. Those are the kinds of things that I think that really matter. And just in the spirit of this podcast also, we are in the business of wealth creation. So for us, this is absolutely important. Unfortunately, this is not investment advice anyway, so don't take this as investment advice. at all. But you can't. It's not like there's company X has in the bylaws. Well, we're like we have X Y Z, and therefore we're going to create wealth. It doesn't work like that. Like yeah, it's between the lines. The culture is something that you know it when you see it, but it's very hard to define. But anyway, highly recommended because it's not just a fun story to read, but it's really, really, really important to learn from this book what it means. This is one of the sequels to Zero to One. This brings me to the fifth book, which is East of Eden, Steinbeck. Now, that's certainly not the first time I read this book. I don't know how many times I read the book, but the reason I have it on the list is because it was the right time for me to read the book, and I felt really good about it. So that's why I want to put it in this 24 list. And this is also, I'm not going to now discuss the book in terms of what it means and stuff in general, but what I took away from it fundamentally. And let's continue with the money-making aspect, wealth creation. Money is a big part of the book. There's money that is, first of all, it always comes from somewhere. People keep inheriting money, finding money, destroying money. So Steinbeck seems to be obsessed with money, which is interesting. Obsessed is maybe an extreme word, but he certainly cares about it. And there's some of the interesting lines in the books are, the sort of the reason in the book, the character of Li, the Chinese servant. He talks about how it's interesting how all these good people, these people that really live these pure good lives, that they seem to come to money, and the money is always made in a bad way, right? Making money. And this is, the biblical allusions in the book are, of course, very big. And one of them is sort of the making money is a bad thing kind of feeling that you have. I'm not familiar anymore with the actual character names, but there's the brother of I believe it was Aaron, Caleb, his brother. Yeah, he makes money with speculation, then destroys the money because he feels like it's not worth it and things like that. Now, look, we're in the hedge fund business, so we certainly don't have a problem making money, and we don't believe that making money is a bad thing, particularly not with speculation. But there's certainly a question to be asked whether it is okay to front run people, even if it's in a legal way, and buy futures of something knowing that the price will go up. But how else can I do it? Like even if I wanted to inform farmers that corn's going to go up next year, and corn price is $4, and I buy the futures and then sell them for $6 because they went up. Well, they also have the right to buy it. They're not buying it, I'm buying it. That's my contribution to the world. That's the way we see it. That's why we're being tolerated by people, I think, because we have this information quality to express opinions, and then they translate into prices, and then prices are what people can use as information, and so forth. Now, in East of Eden, that is being questioned. There is actually a scene in the book where they are buying bean futures because there's World War I coming, and then one of the characters in the book, the main character, the father of Caleb, he thinks it's really bad to do that. And again, I don't want to discuss this further. Capitalism is based on these things. And I'm not even sure what Steinbeck's opinion would be. And I think in the nature of a good writer, he just puts it out there. He doesn't necessarily have to agree or disagree with it. It's just an interesting question. I think overall, of course, the book is a biblical allusion. So there's lots of good and bad, evil, the mother, the whore, lots and lots of allusions to the Bible here. But aside from that, I think, well, of course, living in like an hour away from Salinas, I'm incredibly close to this whole area. I spent a lot of time in the Monterey Valley and actually Monterey itself, and surfed there a lot. So this is definitely something where I also have a geographical attachment to, and that's probably why I like Steinbeck so much. But I think for us now, professionally, this book has definitely this more deeper sense of, okay, look, what is it exactly we're doing, right? What's the purpose of speculation? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Now, let's assume it's a good thing. What's the purpose of it, right? The purpose of it is to convey information to the market, make money that way, deploy capital to projects that have future benefits to society. We often talk about P times Q, like P is the value that you create for society, Q is the value you capture for yourself. That PQ would be better, very high, and P should be about 10x Q. So you should always create about 10 times more value than, you should create 10 times more value than you capture. So I think when we look at this, this is not a bad way to think about it. What's wrong with George Soros? Well, he has a very high PQ, but he keeps most of the Q. That's why we have a problem with George Soros. We don't have a problem with most of our investments because no matter, even if we wanted, we wouldn't be able to capture more than a fraction of the value that it created for society. In overall, wealth creation is a good thing because it creates wealth for everybody. Wealth, as defined by David Deutsch, is the cumulative ability of a society to transform itself. That's what wealth is. Money helps, wealth helps, capital helps, but it's not just that. It's knowledge, it's freedom, it's moral knowledge, it's ethical knowledge. All these things are part of a wealthy society, and you can't just have one without the other. Namely, China has lots of wealth in terms of money, but no wealth in terms of liberty, and therefore it's not a wealthy society. So to summarize the 5 books again that we discussed here: The Painted Word, Girl in a Band, Zhivago, The Whole Story, and East of Eden. These books are, to some extent, really great books to read, sometimes also the right books to read at the right time. But most importantly, they all inspire us to think further and develop our minds. Thank you.